So a very good evening to you all, and a very special warm welcome to Sue. My name is Janine Kirby and I'm the chairperson of IMISA, and it's so wonderful to have all of you joining and having this sense of community. And even though we all live far away, and I know some people join us from very far away, yet we can still join together on screen and be in community together. So a very warm welcome to Sue, and thank you to Sue for agreeing to facilitate this learning forum. And it's so lovely. Every time we have a learning forum, it's slightly different because we have different speakers and they bring their own essence of who they are and their own wisdom and the way in which they communicate the teachings to us. So it's lovely to have somebody like Sue, and somebody who actually has got your experience, Sue. So Sue has extensive experience both as a psychoanalytic psychotherapist and has long-standing connections to the Buddhist traditions. And we're really excited to hear what you have to say. So thank you, Sue. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Janine, and hello everyone. It's so lovely to see some familiar faces. Please feel free to open your videos, even just for a moment, to say hello and to be practicing together here as a collective Sangha is always such a special privilege and treat. So welcome. So there are quite a few of you I haven't yet met, so I thought I would just give a little brief introduction before we begin and go into some initial silence. Just to say that I've had such a lovely long-standing association with people in IMISA, working alongside in parallel for many years, and finally this year we intersected and I was privileged enough to facilitate the retreat at the end of the 2-year training. And so it's been a wonderful coming together of different sanghas, and I see this evening there's also a coming together of quite of our collective sanghas. So I was very fortunate in my early to mid-20s, which is nearly 40 years ago now, to land at the Buddhist Retreat Centre in KwaZulu-Natal, Ixopo, and that was where I first encountered these teachings and practices. And that was even before I had qualified as a psychologist. And it was very much part of my own journey of exploration. And over the years, and then subsequently when I did train as a clinical psychologist, I became aware of this incredible interface of mindfulness practices, psychological work, and Buddhist wisdom. And it felt like a very rich tapestry. And over time, I felt a need more and more in my work as a psychotherapist to really introduce some of the mindfulness practices and teachings and Buddhist wisdom into my psychological work as a therapist. And so in 2010, I began what I called Open the Heart and Still the Mind as a process of bringing together all these threads. And over this decade and a bit, what has become increasingly obvious to me is that the heart-based element of mindfulness and Buddhist wisdom is really the most transformative and liberating. And so that is why this evening I wanted us to have a chance to both reflect on and practice some of this heart-based element of this path. And so I thought to begin with, we could just have a few moments of silence Everybody has been arriving. Hello to those I haven't said hello to before. And so I invite you to settle into a comfortable posture. Just taking a few deeper breaths, closing your eyes, and taking a moment to put down whatever you've been carrying from this day. Taking a moment to tune in to how and where you are within your body, your heart, and your mind. Give your body permission to soften, perhaps moving the attention from the crown of the head downwards. Noticing where there is bracing and tightening. Trusting that it is safe to soften. To put aside what you are carrying and to rest in the stillness that we are sharing together. How might you practice listening deeply? Asks Mark Nepo. We can always begin by allowing ourselves to sink into the depth of whatever moment we are in. For depth is ever present. We don't have to travel to find depth. We simply have to relax our minds into the ground of where we are, the way roots unravel in the earth after a long, soaking rain. Just sitting with that image for a moment of roots unraveling in the earth after a long, soaking rain. Slowly opening your eyes again. And just noticing how you're feeling now. And noticing how, as we pause and stop, there is a sense of bringing some kindness to ourselves. In many ways, for me, the heart of mindfulness practice is metta, loving kindness, meditation. It is what brings mindfulness alive for me. And part of that is because when I was first exposed to these teachings and to an understanding of Buddhist wisdom, what was always emphasized was the fact that this is an ethical tradition. It's one of the early ethical traditions that combines spiritual practice with a sense of morality. It shares a way of living in the world that has more compassion and consciousness. And so I began to realize that meditation and mindfulness are not only practices of becoming aware, learning to pay attention more skillfully, more wisely, but they are practices which emphasize becoming aware and learning to open the heart and to change your relationship to yourself and to whatever you are experiencing. And that was a profound revelation to me. So often we can feel we have this handicap of our past. We have a legacy that we are landed with. And we can often imagine that it would be so much easier to find inner peace and to quieten the mind without some of our history that we carry from the past into the present. And what I realized was that the more you open the heart, the more you can change your relationship to that past. The more you can reframe your history and have a different experience and sense of yourself. As I practiced longer as a psychotherapist, I realized that talking and thinking and gaining insight, whilst being invaluable parts of a process of healing and self-discovery, talking, analyzing, having insights are never sufficient to change what we most fundamentally struggle with. Most of us know the story. We know where some of our struggles come from, and yet we still feel stuck when making choices and changing entrenched patterns of behavior. And that is where meditation is such a powerful complementary process to any talking, reflective process. Learning to sit in silence with ourselves, learning to understand the patterns of the mind and the movements in the heart and the body, completely changes our way of relating to ourselves and to our lives. And so this weaving together of different traditions, the Western psychological tradition, the Eastern Buddhist psychological and wisdom tradition with these practices, was, in my experience, the most powerful way of effecting change and healing. Particularly because for most people, the deepest wound is a sense of unworthiness and not feeling good enough or deserving. That seems to be a common thread through many, many human beings' experience. Not feeling good enough, having a very vicious inner critic, and not being able to find ease and freedom because of a sense of ourselves which remains very contracted and insecure through changing circumstances. And so I realized that learning to calm the mind is a starting point. Learning to feel grounded and at ease in the body and the mind is incredibly helpful. But it isn't the calm state alone that is sufficient to really address some of our more deeply embedded wounds that link to our whole sense of who we are, our whole sense of self. And it was then so interesting for me to discover that when the Buddha introduced metta meditation, which is a practice, a compassion practice of loving kindness, sometimes translated as friendliness, or a quality of heart and consciousness that offers a feeling of goodwill, a well-wishing to others and to ourselves. When the Buddha introduced this, it was as an antidote mainly to fear. It was when the monks were practicing in the forests of ancient India, and as you can imagine at that time, there must have been many, many tigers and various creatures of the night prowling around. And what the practitioners found was that mindfulness of breathing was not sufficient to deal with the levels of fear that were arising. When we have extended time in silence, we dive more deeply into the psyche, often into the unconscious. And when we dive into the unconscious, as we know we have access to through mindfulness practices, we encounter our fears and our deepest wounds. And so it's that level of our experience that we sometimes access in meditation, that the mindfulness of breathing isn't always adequate to contain and to hold. And that is where metta meditation is such a gift, because it is a practice of befriending and really bringing compassionate understanding and awareness to what is most painful for us to bear and be with. And it can be so helpful when we remember that metta is an antidote to fear and self-doubt. The two obstacles on our path that are part of the 5 hindrances, that are the biggest obstacles to ease and well-being: fear and doubt. Doubt often being directed towards ourselves, self-doubt. I call them the killer hindrances, fear and self-doubt. They are debilitating and crippling, and they disconnect us from what is possible for us and from a sense of who we really are. So much of our pain comes from rejecting and abandoning parts of ourselves. Parts that carry shame, parts that we feel aren't good enough or acceptable enough or lovable enough. And metta as a practice is one of embracing and integrating these parts that perhaps have got pushed aside and are perpetuating our struggle. The calm and the stabilizing element of mindfulness, as many of us know, is one wing of the bird of freedom. The other wing is the wing of insight, vipassana. Tranquility and insight balance each other. And out of that insight, wisdom arises, and the wing that balances wisdom is compassion. Metta meditation is an expression of the practice of compassion. It is a way of engaging with suffering through directing our attention in a very loving and gentle and intentional way to ourselves, to each other, and to this world. And I shared those words on Listening by Mark Nepo thinking of the roots unraveling after some rains, because sometimes metta is likened to the rain nourishing the earth, falling on the earth, feeding the earth and allowing growth. In my experience, it is this heart-based practice of metta which infuses our vipassana and insight mindfulness practice, allowing greater growth to take root. Metta nourishes the ground of our being so that our insights no longer remain only as something intellectual, but they become something that is heartfelt and embodied, which is necessary to effect change. Insight alone is not always adequate enough to bring about lasting change. Of course, insight is incredibly helpful and part of the process. But what we discover is that when circumstances are really overwhelming and stressful, when we have a lot of uncertainty, a lot of loss, when the system feels traumatized, insight alone seems to evaporate. We can't think when we're in a very overwhelmed state of distress. And so we come back to the practices of the heart. We come back to learning to contain ourselves through opening the heart in this very loving, befriending, forgiving way. Forgiving ourselves really for our humanness, for our imperfections, for not always being able to stay connected to what we know is real and true. Our emotions are like waves, and we know that waves at times knock us over. We lose our balance when waves are very huge and strong. And so when the waves of emotion and very painful thought catch us unawares, we need to find a way to come back to stability. And sometimes before the breath is a powerful enough anchor, we need to do some work with the heart. And that is where metta meditation comes in. It is a practice of learning to listen to the cries of the world at ease. In my own journey of metta meditation, it was the teachers Kittisaro and Thanissara, who many of you know were founders of Dharmagiri. They're now based in America, who really introduced me to Kuan Yin practice, this embodiment of compassionate wisdom. Kuan Yin, who listens to the cries of the world at ease. And part of her gift is this gift of compassionate listening that is fearless and courageous. She listens at ease. And she represents an archetypal good enough mothering energy that we carry in ourselves that guides us to make compassionate, wise choices. Because when we are overwhelmed and in states of fear, we will always revert to our default vulnerable places. And within those vulnerable places, usually what dictates our choices is fear. And so what learning to listen with a very open, benevolent heart at ease does is it takes us back to a place of wisdom and containment. And so metta meditation is the most powerful practice to contain whatever feels fragmented or scattered or overwhelming. And because it is a containing practice for the heart and the mind, it helps to strengthen our boundaries. And so another reason that for me metta is such a gift and a central part of mindfulness is that it brings that awareness to a deeper level where we begin to understand what is inside and what is outside, what is nourishing and nurturing to focus on, and what is unhelpful and self-destructive to focus on. Because as we know with practices of attention, there are so many different things we can choose to pay attention to. People often ask me, how do we know when to pay attention to a strong emotion, when to come back to the breath? How do we know what is the wise, appropriate object of attention? A guideline for me is what is it and how do we feel most stable and calm as a starting point? Because until there is a feeling of groundedness and calm, we're not in a position to address very overwhelming emotions. And so we are using these practices both to bring states of calm, tranquility, groundedness, so that we can open our heart and cultivate more compassion for ourselves as human beings, for each other as interconnected beings, and for this very suffering, broken world that we are living in. We are learning to befriend all parts of ourselves and our experience. The painful, the neutral, the joyful. We're learning to savor what is beautiful and wondrous and enlivening and inspiring. And we're learning to become more courageous and confident to stay with what is painful and overwhelming, bringing metta to ourselves and then to others and to the world. Sometimes the biggest gift we could give to each other is that gift of metta, which is a quality of heart and mind that is linked to the radiant nature of an awakened, liberated heart. Sometimes our true nature is described as that of a radiant heart. And so metta is like this glowing sun that shines light in all directions, bringing well-being, offering goodwill, offering peace and friendship to ourselves and to each other. I think we don't always realize the extent to which we are at war within, the extent to which we carry self-hatred, self-loathing. And so the only way we can end the external wars is by addressing the internal wars. And I had a profound teaching once from a Sri Lankan teacher, Godwin Samararatna, that some of you might have had the good fortune of meeting. He used to visit South Africa. And people used to say to him, how do we deal with the violence in our country, the violence around us? And his teaching was incredibly clear, and it had the clarity of what is known as the sword of Manjushri. Manjushri is the bodhisattva, the embodiment of wisdom, often depicted with a very sharp sword, that sword of Manjushri that cuts through delusion and illusion. And he would say, just look at the violence in your own heart. That's where the practice needs to be. We don't realize that a lot of our internal dialogue is very self-attacking, very self-critical. Sometimes it's obvious and sometimes it's really subtle. And those are little moments of violence against ourselves. And those begin a bigger war against ourselves, which sometimes can end in huge despair and self-hatred. And so it's metta meditation that I have found most beneficial for softening and dissolving the power of the inner critic. Sometimes it's as though we have a team of inner critics that we have to contend with. These internalized voices, often from authority figures, parental voices, and sometimes from our own superego, our own aspiring to be perfect, perhaps, what I call the curse of perfectionism, that leads us to be so harsh with ourselves. And that dialogue creates incredible pain and conflict and turmoil within, so that at times it's even hard to just sit and be quiet because we feel so under attack. Many people who say, oh, I can't meditate. It's such a difficult practice. It's so hard to be truly mindful because the mind wanders in all directions. Mostly that struggle is because of how much self-criticism there is when we are quiet. And so I'm going to invite us to a meditation now, which is really dedicated to the cultivation of peace and goodwill for ourselves, for each other, and for this world. Drawing on this energy of the archetypal good enough mother that is a voice we can internalize, that will soften that voice of the inner critic. The voice that within this Buddhist tradition is sometimes personified by a figure known as Mara. Mara means illusion. It's the voice that carries messages that aren't true. It's not true that we are unworthy and undeserving. It's not true that we are useless and unlovable. And so we are going to meet Mara with metta. We're going to use our heart's capacity to soften and to befriend, to create more peace within. And of course, where there is more peace, there is more joy. And so thank you for listening. And please choose a posture now and feel free to lie down if that is what your body is calling for. Choose a posture, support your back if you need to, grab a cushion or a blanket. And just allow yourself to close your eyes gently and to arrive in this moment taking a few deep, full breaths. And with the out breath, give a big sigh, allowing a deeper softening as you rest on the earth. Sharon Salzberg said, "It is only love that is big enough to hold all the pain of this world." Only love is big enough to hold all the pain of this world. And so we're going to begin our metta meditation, softening the body and listening to a poem by Rosemary Watala Troma called Self-Compassion. And within this practice, it can be very helpful to place a hand on the heart and on the belly, just creating a warm, loving embrace as a gesture with the body. Perhaps both hands on the chest if you prefer, but a hand on the heart and on the belly brings us closer to where we carry our suffering and our emotions. Holding ourselves in this gentle embrace as we listen. Self-compassion. It's like the scent of rain after a month of drought. The way it rises up and fills the lungs and quiets the body and softens the mind. That's what it's like when, after grasping and spinning and reaching and clenching, at last, exhausted with my own fear, I lay my hand on my own heart and see through my thoughts and practice loving what is here beneath my palm. This frightened woman and the life that lives through her, not a single promise that she will be safe, but oh, as I press my hand into the beat of her anxious heart, I promise she will be loved. And so as you rest your hand and your belly over your heart, your gut, take a moment just to notice what is there that you are receiving into your awareness. Notice the sensations in the body. The feelings and the thoughts. Particularly notice any vulnerability that you are aware of in this moment. Soften the jawbone so that you're not clenching the teeth. And allow yourself to meet whatever is arising with kindness, with compassion. Not asking yourself why you are feeling like this. Not telling yourself you shouldn't be having these thoughts. Just create a very welcoming embrace of awareness that is a gentle home within. Begin by letting things be as they are. If the voice of the inner critic has crept in already, just welcome that too. Meeting it with kindness. That voice doesn't know a better way, a wiser way, yet. Notice the parts of the body that carry judgment and shame, disdain perhaps. And with your hand on your heart, imagine a warm glow of metta beginning to radiate beneath your palms. And begin to nourish the body with that energy of loving kindness, friendliness, compassionate wisdom. You might like to say out loud to yourself, or hold these words in your awareness. May this body be nourished with metta. Notice what is in the heart and the mind that are causing contraction and pain, aches of pain, heartache. And with your next deep out breath that follows an in-breath, soften and feel that metta radiating through the heart, mind space of awareness. May this heart and mind be nourished with metta. If it feels difficult, uncomfortable to direct loving kindness to yourself, then hold an image of yourself from the past, perhaps from when you were very little, or from a time when you were struggling and longed for someone to just hold you in a quiet, loving embrace. Invite that image of yourself into your awareness and imagine that you've gathered yourself onto your lap in this embrace right now. Offering yourself exactly what you're needing. Offering yourself your own open-hearted presence, kind, forgiving, loving presence. You might like to try saying these words aloud now. Right now I am safe and held and loved. I am worthy of being who I am. I belong and I am deserving of joy. I don't have to be perfect to receive kindness and love. As you rest in the silence, you might like to breathe in with loving kindness, with metta, and breathe out with compassion. Once again, holding that image of yourself in your awareness as you try these words of a metta blessing. May I be well and at ease. May I be peaceful and calm. May I be free of fear. Free of shame and self-doubt. May I rest in this loving embrace of metta. May I trust myself and my capacity for healing, for wholehearted presence, and for transformation. May we share the blessings of our practice for the welfare of all beings, for inner peace and for outer peace. Very slowly opening your eyes, perhaps stretching out if you would like to. Give a big stretch. And so before we open up for some questions, some reflections, I just wanted to once again share that this practice of metta, of meeting ourselves and our experience with kindness and compassion, is one element that deepens our capacity for mindfulness. When we are more at peace with ourselves, when there is more harmony within, our capacity to pay attention, to be aware, to make connections, to understand and be less reactive, increases exponentially the more our heart is part of our practice. And so I would like to invite anyone to share whatever they would like to, or ask a question. Feel free to unmute yourself. Is that okay, Janine? Is there?
Yes.
Thank you. So whoever would like to just share perhaps something you experienced in that meditation, or if there was anything that I shared that you would like clarity on.
Hello.
Perhaps you can just say your name as you unmute.
My name is Yas,
Hi, Yas.
and thank you, Sue, for this wonderful session. My question is, what does this practice look like if you were to practice on behalf of someone else? If you see that someone is suffering and they're struggling, but they're not there, they're not where you're at to do such a practice, what would it look like? What would the impact be to do it on behalf of them?
Thank you, Yas. That's a wonderful question. And because of time constraints, I only directed the metta internally to ourselves. But a huge component of metta practice is actually directing it to others who are suffering, who we love, who we are concerned about. And sometimes, as you said, people aren't ready to perhaps apply certain insights that we might have, certain understanding that we might have that could reduce their suffering. And that can be very painful to sit with. And what we do then is we direct the practice in exactly the same way, saying, may you be well and at ease. May you be peaceful and calm. May you feel held by a warm embrace of metta and compassion. And one sits with that, really filling one's heart with metta and allowing that radiating metta to reach to them. And remembering that metta is one of the four immeasurables, these qualities of heart that are sometimes called the divine abodes, metta and compassion, the foundational qualities of the immeasurable heart. When we offer metta and hold someone in our awareness like that, very often we are communicating to them in an unconscious way, sending an energy which can then touch their heart. And if you think about it, if someone is really worried about you or really angry with you, you can feel it without them having to say it. So if someone is holding you with great love and compassion, you will also feel it without them having to say it. And so often when we are very worried about someone, I encourage that we hold them with metta rather than with worry. Because the worry is not helpful to receive. In fact, it can be quite irritating and annoying to be the object of worry, even if it comes out of a good intention. But to be the recipient of metta, to know, and even to say to someone, I'm holding you with metta, with kindness and with love, it's a very powerful way of offering support. So thank you so much for asking that. And that's why we offer metta to the world, because in a way we're bringing this energy and this quality of consciousness into the space around us and to the people around us. So thank you, Yas.
I didn't realize that holding worry for them would actually be attracting more worry. So that was quite a powerful response. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, Sue. It's Lisa here.
Hi, Lisa. Lovely to see you.
Very lovely to see you. Thank you for this beautiful session. I just want to say that, it's so comforting to place a hand on one's heart or on one's body. And I was just reminded of that. There's such a, like, I'm sure it's not always the case, but for me in that moment, I just really appreciated that soothing, self-soothing, and sort of leaning into that warmth coming from my own hand, made a huge difference. So I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Thank you, Lisa. And, thank you for raising that, because what I didn't share is that tactile contact, the hand on the heart and on the belly, because we carry a lot of turmoil and angst in our bellies, is very soothing for the nervous system. And apart from touch being very comforting, we all know that touch is comforting. It's not only the comfort at the surface of the body, and of course, if you can touch the skin, have direct skin to skin touch, it's even more powerful. But it is actually working at a nervous system level, as I know you know with your somatic work that you do. And very quickly, when we are in a state of panic and huge agitation, sometimes just a hand on the heart and on the belly can settle the nervous system surprisingly quickly and gather what is fragmented and making us even dissociate. It's like gathering ourselves as you would a very, very distressed child, or a child having a tantrum. You would gather them into that kind of embrace. And so what this gesture does is it gathers ourselves into that embrace and communicates, I am here with you. And so I think why it's so comforting is it reminds us that we're not alone. We are literally here with that part of ourself that was in distress. So thank you so much for noticing that. Who would like to go next?
Hi, Sue. This is Megan
Hi,
speaking.
Megan.
I've heard a lot of your meditations and thank you so much for that. I am experiencing or living a very painful event at the moment. I haven't seen my daughter. She's 13 for a year and 10 months now. And I practice mindfulness and meditation. But I still find that the pain and the suffering, after I've done the meditation, it feels less. But the minute I don't feel grounded, it overwhelms me.
Yes.
And I want to learn how to be more softer and more gentle with myself and in my surroundings. And I struggle with that.
Thank you.
And what would your advice be?
Thank you. Well, definitely my advice would be Metta as a medicine. It's a practice that can allow you not only to hold yourself and your suffering with loving kindness, but also to hold your daughter and the space between yourself and your daughter. And so what I love about Metta is that it moves through time and space. It moves past, future, present. And sometimes when we feel so overwhelmed, surrounding ourselves with this feeling of loving kindness, so that it's inside and outside and touching the heart of the other person, can really hold one in a way that sometimes a more regular mindfulness practice of breathing can't do, because of the intensity of the emotion. Exactly what you were saying. when we get easily derailed, or when we lose our ground easily, we are needing to really root ourselves, using this metta as that nourishment for the ground of our being, to be something we then reconnect with and stay connected to. And so what I would really suggest is every meditation to contain some metta. Sometimes even if all you do is say those words, say them aloud, say them to her, say them to the space around you. Saying it aloud is powerful in the way the hand on the heart and the belly are. Because what we are doing when we're saying these phrases is we're replacing our habitual thought with other thoughts that are much more helpful. So may I be well and at ease, may you be well and at ease, is more helpful than the looping and ruminating and obsessing thoughts that come when we're in great pain. So in a way, we allowing thought to be a friend rather than an enemy. Because when we have a deep pain like you're describing, our thoughts often aren't helpful because they're often catastrophic and they are quite despairing very quickly. And so these phrases, these words, fill the mind with a different possibility. And that's why I've started actually changing it from may I be to I am. I am safe and held. You are safe and held in my heart. There's so much you could say. What would you say if that person, if your daughter, if whoever you're concerned about is right there? What would you say to them? You are safe and held in my heart. I am with you. You are not alone. And that immediately is calming for oneself. Because part of what we experience in these situations is terrible separation anxiety, when we are separated from people we love. And so that's why we get into a state of panic so easily. And so to use the phrases in all your meditations as a way to offer yourself comfort and offer comfort outwardly. So I hope that might be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Metta meditation is the most powerful antidote for depression and anxiety. It was also taught as a kind of protection practice. If you think of the Buddha suggesting that the monks use metta in the forests and in the wild, part of it was a protection for the mind, because fear and overwhelm creates fantasies that are often worse even than the reality. And so we are learning to protect the mind from running away in a direction that is very damaging to our, at times, sanity even. It's a protection to bring us back to a calm wisdom. And so whenever we feel terrible panic and overwhelm, metta is the practice to turn to. And then you will find quite naturally, when your heart is settled, you will come to the breath. You will naturally land with an awareness again of your breathing. And what I've also found helpful is consciously making the in-breath one of drawing metta from the universe. Drawing collective metta. Maybe we feel we don't have that kindness in our own heart yet. Then we breathe it from our collective metta, from the universe, and we breathe out compassion, which then joins that universal metta. Because people will sometimes say, I have so much self-loathing, I don't know how to be kind to myself. So then, in a way, we support each other through our collective metta practice. And so every time each of us is practicing metta and breathing that in and out, we are breathing into a universal pool of metta that we can draw from. We know about the collective unconscious. So this metta is going into that pool that is available to all of us if we connect with it. Who would like to go next?
Hi Sue, it's Aisha.
Hi Aisha, so wonderful to see you here.
You too. Thank you. There were two things just to reflect on the somatic experience of placing my hand on my heart. Has become something I turn to quite easily in moments of distress, and it's definitely, when I do that, it automatically quells the harsh inner voice. So that's been really helpful. So I think what I'm noticing is that it's becoming easier to send metta to myself, but where I'm finding it challenging is when I'm feeling quite consumed by anger or hurt, and then I try to come back to a metta practice for that particular person, I get a bit stuck because it starts to feel insincere. And sometimes it flows quite easily, and at other times I can feel a resistance, and it can feel quite just a bit triggering. And I just wondered if you had any advice around how to navigate that aspect of sending metta.
Thank you so much. Thank you,
Thank you.
Aisha. So perhaps what I'll start with is just saying that conventionally, metta is directed to oneself, to someone we love and are close to, which is often the easiest one, to someone we feel more neutral towards, and then to someone we're having conflict with. So as a formal practice, those are the objects of who we direct metta to. And obviously the person who has hurt us, who has perhaps betrayed us, who we are in conflict with, is always or inevitably the most challenging to offer metta to. And what I have found really helpful is to begin by putting metta in the space between myself and that person, because sometimes they feel too dangerous almost to get that close to, even through sending the metta to them. Or sometimes the hurt is so great that we may even feel they don't deserve the metta. That might be the reality. And so then what we think of doing is, instead of this toxic energy between me and them, I'm going to put metta in that space, almost creating a moat of metta around me as a protection against that toxicity. And then that's really what I would start with, is just filling the space with metta. And they are on the other side of that metta, so that I don't feel harmed and at their mercy, perhaps. And then what I always find helpful is remembering that if that person had more metta in their own heart, they wouldn't be treating me or relating like this to others. If their heart had metta, they would be aware of our shared humanity. And so that reminds me of how much they need metta, and sometimes that enables me to then think, okay, well, they don't have access to the metta in their own heart. Let me take this metta from the universe and just direct it towards them, knowing that if they can begin to allow some of this metta into their hearts, that is going to be healing for the world, for everyone. But that is a process, and I think one has to be very gentle with oneself. And there are times where all we can do is fill the space with metta, and even that is helpful because we're sending it in their direction. It's the beginning of almost exposing them in our minds to our metta. I hope that that makes sense.
Thank you, Sue.
Thanks, Aisha. Who would like to go next? Any other questions or reflections, anything you experienced? I think I just want to say one needs to take care when bringing into the awareness an image from childhood. If you've had a lot of trauma in childhood, or if you are working with people who've had a lot of trauma, because that image can reevoke the trauma. And so that is one element of metta that you need to just be aware of, that we are taking the adult in ourselves, the loving, mothering figure in ourselves, and holding some part of us that perhaps feels vulnerable, but knowing that if that vulnerability gets very intense, that maybe then we need to reach out for extra guidance, for a way of approaching it a little more gently and less directly. So I just really want to add that, especially to, the many mindfulness teachers in the group, because we know that we've got a greater awareness now of trauma-sensitive practice. And so although metta is the most healing practice, where there is a lot of trauma, one just needs to be aware that maybe that baby, that child we are holding, is very, very vulnerable. And so then to just listen in to whether we can really just feel that containment overriding the distress. So I don't know if anyone maybe felt that they felt worse with the metta. I invite you just to, share that. But still, ultimately, it is going to be the practice that will be healing. But I just wanted to really mention that. Would anyone like to add?
Sue, it's Barbara.
Hi, Barbara. Lovely to see you.
Yes, thanks. Thank you very much, Sue. And yeah, thank you for just touching in on that, the beautiful aspect of bringing us in a small child, but also the vulnerability that could come with that, and how to work with that in a way that can ultimately transform some trauma. I think for me, again, what I've been aware of, and you spoke to, around the internal dialogue of how we sometimes can be profoundly self-attacking and at war with ourselves. And in a way, with our mindfulness practice of paying attention to those thoughts, it's quite easy to become aware of the more explicit ways in which that we are harmful to ourselves. But we still can escape those more subtle or forms of microaggression, and we can miss those, and we can practice and think but still we can get caught by those sort of whispers or far distant voices, the very subtle forms, and kind of our blind spots. And so I'm just wondering if you've got any comments about that. I suppose it's about really listening deeply and really reflecting beyond the more sort of, how can I say it, the louder voices that are harsh and critical, when actually I think sometimes it's those whispers that can be more harmful, but they're almost kind of with outside of our reach or outside of our awareness. So yeah.
Thanks, Barbara. I think often it's almost an attitude with which we relate to ourselves. So saying, oh, I'm so useless, I hate myself, those are obvious self-attacks.
Yeah.
But then noticing through becoming more aware how often we perhaps say yes to a situation where we should be saying no, how we overextend ourselves when we are exhausted, how we say, I don't have anything valuable to say, and we dismiss ourselves, or we somehow diminish ourselves. It's almost an attitude towards ourselves that we start to become aware of that is unkind. And so I think as we practice more metta, my experience is we gain a deeper understanding of what is really kind and what is just superficially kind. Because what I've realized over the years is that the kind choices aren't always the comfortable choices, because they require courage and we're breaking patterns. And so to be really kind to ourselves takes us to that more subtle level of, let's call it self-abandonment rather than self-attack. Because I think maybe what's helpful is to see that there are many ways we self-abandon, where we forget that our needs matter. We forget maybe that our opinion matters. We dismiss ourselves and push ourselves aside. And that's not an obvious self-attack, but it's within the continuum of not respecting and caring for ourselves. And so it might be helpful to just mention that as a concept of self-care is an ending of a cycle of self-abandonment. Some of the self-abandonment has been through direct self-attack and quite vicious accusations and self-blaming. Some of the self-abandonment is through not listening when we are tired and we need rest. Not listening to what the body is saying because the mind thinks we should be or feel a certain way. Not expressing a feeling or voicing something that needs to be voiced. That's not obvious self-attack, but it's within a continuum of rejecting ourselves in such a way that we are not nourishing our well-being, and in doing that we are diminishing our capacity for compassion to others. Because if we are depleted and exhausted and under-resourced, we won't have the capacity to hold the pain around us. And so I hope that answers that.
Absolutely. No, thank you, because I think it is more that subtle self-abandonment. I think I like that, is once if you've got a healthy practice, that kind of sometimes escapes us, and we think, but I know that, and I know I'm not doing that anymore, but there's still the sense of something that I'm missing. So it's that's like that's finer, and I like that idea of the continuum between there's this blatant self-attack and at war with yourself, as opposed to this very subtle, well, no, I'm doing this for everybody else, and yes, I need to do this, and in the service of the well-being of people that I serve, but how am I not serving myself? Yeah, so that speaks to that. So thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. And I think just to add very quickly that, when the Buddha taught metta, he said you can search the whole universe for someone more deserving of metta, and you won't find anyone more deserving than yourself. And for me, that's a deep psychological insight, that if we are not replenished and with capacity and with a sense of well-being, we are not going to be fully available to others, and our compassion very easily leads to compassion fatigue and to burnout. and to perhaps hidden agendas even, treating others in the way we wish we were treated. But what Metta does is really taking responsibility for our own self-care at the subtlest levels in order to create as much well-being for ourselves and for others that we then can share and offer into this world. So I'm aware we have 1 minute left. I don't know if anyone wants to use that minute to say something. Otherwise, I will use the minute to just bring us back to silence. Thank you for all the beautiful messages. I always love to end our sessions in silence together. So maybe that's what we can do. We can just have a moment of silence, and then people can just write some messages before we end the link for those who would like to linger for a few moments. But let's just come back to hand on the heart and on the belly. And I'd like to just express gratitude for this opportunity for us to be here together. Just remembering that it really is only love and kindness that will allow us to hold and heal our own pain and the pain of the world, and allow in more space for the beauty and the joy.
So thank you so much, Sue, for reminding us of the amazing transformative power of these heart-based practices. And thank you to all of you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Janine, and thank you everybody, and wishing you a gentle, metta-filled sleep tonight.